This is my experience after taking 10 grams of magic mushrooms. The strain was penis envy. This was not recreational by any means, and I never intended for it to be that way. I did this 10-gram trip because I am a combat vet that suffers severely from PTSD, anxiety, anger, and the whole nine that comes with being a combat vet. I've done several trips in the past ranging from 2 grams up to 7, and while those trips helped me take the edge off my anxiety, I wanted to go to the source and find out what the exact thing is that is causing my anxiety. I wanted to stare it in the eyes and make it my bitch, and as you will soon find out, boy, was I fucking wrong about that. So to start the trip out, I'd gotten 15 grams of magic mushrooms from my dealer because my girlfriend was wanting to do her own 5-gram trip. And I was still at the time on the edge of doing another 7-gram trip or going full bore to find the source of my anxiety and do the 10-gram trip. Come the next morning, I was weighing everything out, and I decided that I ain't no bitch and I'm going to go full bore and do the 10-gram trip. I weighed them out and got to exactly 10 grams. I put them in my blender and made them into a fine powder. Then I made myself my tea and mixed in 2 hot chocolate packets and drank it as I have done with all my prior trips. I then lay down in my bed, put my earbuds in and turned on a lyricless trippy song playlist. I put on my sleep mask to block out all incoming light, and then I waited. My girlfriend was on my right side and was there to trip sit me. This was not her first ride, and thank God it wasn't. Within probably 10 minutes, I began to see light visuals. At first, it was me above a lake, and I was watching the ripples of the water go through the lake. It was very peaceful and somber. This very quickly escalated to visions that I was in a room and there were people, and they began to open the door and leave. I told them not to leave me. I didn't want them to leave me. I was enjoying the time that I was spending with them. Shortly after saying that, though, I realized that I was going against my one biggest piece of advice, and that was fighting the mushroom. I was fighting them, trying to get them to stay. So I told them they can go should they like, and they did. Visions of them were replaced with a black demonic figure, with a handful of some golden energy-looking stuff. It's quite hard to describe how it looked to me. This figure then began to take away the energy, and I once again set myself up for failure and told it to not take the energy. After realizing the mistake that I had made, I told it that it could take it. For a brief moment after that, I was talking to a black man about something. He phased into a red car, and his head turned into a pizza box. I'd been craving Domino's pizza for some time, so I'm sure that just made its way into my trip somehow. Very weird. I remember explaining out loud and audibly laughing that this man's head turned into a pizza box. From there, the trip took a super awesome turn, and I had become nothingness. I was infinitely big and infinitely small, and I was left to explore the world. God told me that the world to me was my side of the bed, and he proclaimed to me that he wanted me to explore it. So I began to physically explore my bed. I was flipped upside down on the bed for some time, putting my head where my feet normally go, and feet where my head goes. I was feeling and exploring my girlfriend's legs. I was nothingness left to explore the vast darkness under the covers. It was the most incredible feeling. At some point when I was under there, I pulled off my trip mask and changed my playlist from my lyricless playlist to my normal playlist, which contains songs from Dayseeker, Bad Omens and Lorna Shore, heavy metal and death metal bands. Eventually, I came out from underneath the covers and resumed laying in my normal spot on my bed. From here, my memory becomes kind of clogged on the chain of events leading up to about 5 minutes before me peaking, but I began to slowly dissolve into a panicked state of mind. I was unaware of the change in the trip, and so was my girlfriend. Things began to take a turn and I started becoming indecisive. I would say I wanted sparkling water, and my girlfriend would go get me some, and when she would come back, I would explain that I no longer wanted any. This happened several times. I'd given my girlfriend my phone and told her to change songs when I requested it. At one point, I had her restart Immortal by Lorna Shore 3 times because I wasn't happy with it. Then I quieted down and laid in bed and went through about 30 minutes of music before asking her to restart back on Immortal once more. Then shit went south, and it went south quick. I rolled over and jokingly said to my girlfriend, "I'm scared I'm going to fall off the floor." Then about 10 seconds later I did it again, saying the same thing, but slightly more serious. A third time I did it, except this time it was filled with rage. I slung my trip mask across my room and screamed at her that I'm scared I'm going to fall off the fucking floor. The trip at this point had become sour. I was quickly losing my mind, ego, and everything about me was quickly vanishing. I started to ego death. I remember looking out of my window, which is normally full of trees, and it was all grey and there were no trees. It was at this point I knew I was in for something, and I wasn't prepared. I pulled my covers over my eyes and pulled my earbuds out, saying, "I don't want the music anymore." I just laid there. I felt my soul surge with the energy of a million souls, and I began a physical climb up what looked like Mount Everest. I was out of body. This was not an easy climb. It was everything. It was all my trauma, my PTSD, my anxiety, my anger, fucking everything. This was that mountain, and the power of those million souls was what gave me the energy to climb this mountain. I was peaking, and I was peaking harder than I had ever peaked in my life. Then I came out of the out-of-body experience. There was music in my ears, but nothing was playing. My earbuds were out, and I'm pretty sure my TV was off. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard in my life. I broke down, and I broke down hard. I was crying the hardest that I have cried in years. I told my girlfriend to hold on, because I was just a foot from the peak of this mountain of trauma that I had just climbed, and I needed her physical energy to complete this climb. She held on, and I fucking blasted off. It was amazing. It was the greatest release of emotion and pain that I have ever wanted. I remember saying, "This is what I've been after." And it was. It was exactly what I needed. My girlfriend was there with me to give me the final bit of strength to come up and stand atop that mountain of torment and trauma. I thanked the souls that had joined me on my journey and who had so graciously given me their energy. I remember screaming at the absolute top of my lungs, "I am God." And I meant it with the conviction of a billion souls, because in that moment, standing atop that mountain, I was God. There was only one person in the universe that could have done what I just did, and it, therefore, meant that I was that. I got out of my bed and came into my office and collapsed on the floor, a broken man. I was broken. I just overcame what I had been using shrooms to help me overcome, and I didn't know what I was meant to be anymore. I began the most brutal ego death that I have ever experienced, and I was the test subject on this train ride to hell. I was on the floor of my office, screaming and crying. I called for my girlfriend to come in and just be with me because I was fucking scared. I was a broken man, and at the same time, I felt like I was a god. I was a broken god. One that had gone astray from the normal paths of the gods, and one that will forever be exiled and forgotten about, unless he does one thing. I told my girlfriend to get me my favourite sweatpants. What was coming was something I could have never been prepared for, and I don't think anyone would ever be prepared for. She brought me my favourite sweatpants and a blanket. I laid there, knowing what I must do, and it felt so good to have that thought. It was the happiest thought of my life, while at the same time, I was filled with dread. It was like this trip was the pathway to healing. I knew what I had to do, and I learned from those 2 incidents prior that I must not fight the mushroom. I must give in to it and listen to it. The it that I'm talking about is suicide. My trip had turned sour. It had turned beyond sour, and I was happy about it. I was extremely happy that I was prepared to kill myself. I was seeing it as a gateway to the next level. I was at a fork in the road. I began pacing about because while this thought was on one brain wavelength of mine, another brain wavelength was the more sober one, and it knew suicide is never an option. It knew how bad it was. It knew that I must never do that. I looked at my girlfriend as she was following me around as I paced between the bedroom and my office. I told her, "Whatever happens, happens." That was all that I was able to say. I was trying to ground myself, but the combination of the overwhelming music in my ears, the ungodly intense visuals, and the fact that at this point I had lost complete grip with reality made it literally impossible to ground myself. I was panicking. I was in the midst of the most brutal ego death, and I was at a crossroads. Fight the mushroom and live, or submit and fucking die. Obviously, I fought, and I fought with fucking everything that I had. The only way I knew how to fight was to lay down in my bed, so I did. I was still trying to ground myself at this point because suicide was still ever so prevalent in my head. To me, reality was just a word. It was not something tangible. It was not something that I could touch. It was not me, laying in my bed, with my girlfriend standing up next to me. I was nothingness again, but in the most horrible way. I tried everything to ground myself. At this point, I lost the ability to distinguish between what was genuine reality, my memories, fake bullshit that my brain was concocting, and whatever shit else was coming out. It was all one, but not in a good way. Now I had 4 trains of thought, and 4 sets of emotions all running congruent with each other. The primary one was one where I truly believed that I had indeed blown my brains out with my 12-gauge shotgun. I believed that I was living in the spirit realm, and it was the most horrifyingly peaceful place that I have ever been. At one point, I remember getting out of bed and checking my gun safe, ensuring that the door on it was still closed and locked. I was making sure that I hadn't gone through with the suicide. While I was able to tell that the door was shut, seeing this did not calm down this train of thought. The second was one where my girlfriend also panicked and had called 911 and my mother. I genuinely believed that there were EMTs and police standing outside of my door and my house, and they were waiting for me to calm down from the trip before they came in and swooped me up and arrested me for some unimaginable crime that I felt I had committed. I was petrified. It was the scariest thing that I have ever experienced and felt. These 2 aforementioned trains of thought would sometime meld with each other and become one. The third train of thought was one where I had my psychotic break and I was actively being carted off on a stretcher, being taken to a loony ward because I was now permanently stuck in this headspace and level of high. I had accepted it, and I understood it. I was very matter-of-fact with this. I accepted it, and I felt that I deserved what I had coming for me, and that was being locked in a loony ward for the rest of my God's given life. I told my girlfriend that I loved her, and that I knew that I was going to lose her, my job and my sponsorship. Just weeks before this trip, I signed my first major sponsorship contract for motorcycle racing, and it's something that brings me great joy seeing where all my hard work has finally gone and things were finally starting to come up. The final train of thought wasn't really a train of thought, but it was the light at the end of this horrific tunnel. Little did I know, but when I was at my peak, standing on top of the mountain of my trauma and pain, there was one more step I hadn't yet overcome, and this was the final step. I got to rebuild my brain to be how I wanted. I got to pick and choose what I wanted to keep and what I wanted to throw away. I was rebuilding my brain, and it brought me great solace to get to do this. So I did. I rebuilt my brain. I picked and chose what I wanted to keep and what I wanted to lose. I peaked at about 10:30, according to the timestamp on my GoPro. I estimate this phase of the trip to have lasted until about noon. Through that hour and a half, I was slowly realizing that I was starting to get to be able to ground myself. It started with me figuring out the time and the date. To me, they meant nothing and were just words, but I was able to understand something physical. At this time, I set a goal for myself, a goal of 4 p.m. I just needed to make it to 4 p.m, and my girlfriend was there to help me with that goal. I can't tell you how many times I asked her the time and date, and just repeated, I just need to make it to 4 p.m. Slowly but surely I came down. I was not stuck in that frame of mind like I thought I was. I indeed didn't kill myself. I wasn't being taken off to the loony ward, and there weren't police and EMTs outside my door and house waiting for me to come down from the trip. I was going to be okay. I was alive, and I had a new brain. A brain that I rebuilt to the specifications that I wanted. One without trauma, pain, or suffering. I still had my wonderful girlfriend, and she was there the whole trip. Fast forward 11 days and I'm still struggling. I find myself sometimes second-guessing if I'm really alive, not believing that I'm actually living, but that is becoming less and less. I keep replaying this trip in my head to gain a better understanding of what went wrong and where it went wrong. I think it went wrong when I threw my trip mask across the floor and exclaimed that I'm scared of falling off the floor. I don't know why it went bad, and I probably never will know why it went bad. All I know is that I must take that trip and learn and grow from it. There is a lesson for everything, and I am learning that lesson every day now. As for my rebuilt brain, it's incredible. I really did rebuild my brain. Since then, I haven't had those issues that I mentioned prior. I can get to sleep in a reasonable time now. I'm able to sleep well, in fact, something that I haven't had in years. I don't have nightmares or night terrors anymore. I think that as bad as this trip was, it was also just as good. I'm taking every day in stride now and working on myself and my issues. And for my girlfriend, she didn't know. She was not aware that I took the 10-gram hero dose. She thought that I was doing 7 grams, and it wasn't until I was laying on the floor of my office that she learned the true size of the dose that I took. I hate that I put her through that trip. I regret at least not telling her and giving her a heads up, but I am forever grateful that she was there with me and helped me climb the final steps of my mountain. I owe her dearly for that. And that's it. That is my trip. I call it my God trip because I was a broken and misplaced God. Simple as that. This trip was just shy of a month ago, and so far, none of my issues have even slightly returned. With all my trips prior by this point, I would have a return of my issues, be it slightly or fully. I truly do feel as if I actually rebuilt my brain and got rid of everything that I have had to live with. I have also found that it is much easier for me to have the ability to look at things in different manners, explore more sides of topics and be more open to those different, often contradicting my own beliefs. It was one hell of a trip, and while it can be looked at as a bad trip, I think that for me it was something that I needed and something that has helped me greatly. You try to make everything perfect so that you can have the best experience possible. You clean your house, you prepare the things you might need or want on your journey. Water, food, or paper for drawing. Perhaps you lay out all your blankets because you know your silly ass is going to end up on the ground, connecting with the earth. You might also do some housekeeping in your headspace, clean mind, clean body, all that. So you meditate, trying to put yourself in the place you want to be when the shroom arrives. You try to control your environment to enhance the trip. Perhaps you even believe this will ensure a good trip. Often, the shroom seemingly appreciates the effort you have put into trying to respectfully accept its many wonderful, powerful gifts and lessons, and often it rewards you with beautiful experiences that leave you with an overwhelming sense of love, beauty, and connectedness to the universe. But sometimes, the shroom gives you the gifts and lessons that you need, not the ones you asked for, or try to set yourself up for. I do all of these things just about every time I meet with the shroom. It's good to be a polite host. I suspect that all of us do this to one extent or another, whether we anthropomorphize the shrooms or not. It stresses me out though because I know deep down I'm just trying to avoid a bad trip, more than I'm just trying to be in a nice atmosphere. Don't get me wrong, I do not believe any trip is a bad trip. They're all valuable in their own way, even if soul-crushingly terrifying in the moment. I also do this as my ritual. I suspect we all have our own. Anyone experiencing psychedelics will tell you, don't try to control the trip, let it take you. And that is great advice, because more often than not, if you try to control it, you're going to have a bad time. That said, I feel like every time I do this, I'm lying to the shroom. I don't live every day like that, running around cleaning everything and making everything just right so the experience will be perfect. I just get up and go about my day like we do. So the shroom probably thinks I'm something I'm not, but I intend to reveal myself to it, the real self. Let me give you some background before I get into the trip. I've been an opiate addict for 22 years. I've never had any real debilitating pain or injuries or anything. I just hate my job and I really like eating pills to numb that pain. Except I don't like eating pills. I'm nearly suicidal because of my addictions. And because I refuse to steal or put my family out to get my drug, I go through withdrawals regularly. I'm a drug addict, but that doesn't mean I'm a monster. I keep my demons to myself. Those are my burdens to carry, and I will not share that weight with the ones I love. Now, though, I am finding it harder and harder to carry these burdens. I can't keep it up anymore. I can't go to work when I'm sick like I could when I was younger, and I won't let my family suffer for my stupidity. So it is time to change. I must do something to get off this ride. I go to a clinic where they put me on Suboxone, which is, believe me, a nasty drug. The idea was to change the pattern of behavior that I've been clinging to for over 20 years. Wake up, find drugs, acquire drugs, go to work, eat, sleep, rinse, repeat. For anyone who doesn't know, this process is truly maddening and becomes an addiction in itself. Finding drugs seems to release dopamine or something. It's a rush in itself. But it's also a personal slice of hell when I can't score, or I know that if I don't use this money for bills, my wife is leaving my sorry ass. The mind of a drug addict is constantly doing mental gymnastics to justify the insanity of what we're doing. So, Suboxone is working to change my behavior. In 7 months, I haven't eaten a single pill, except the Suboxone, and I have fundamentally changed my drug-seeking behavior. Shit is getting done around the house now, like I'm super productive. You have no idea how much time is consumed trying to find drugs. Unless you do, then I'm sorry. The best part is, after the first week of that, it doesn't even get me high anymore, or so I thought. I'd wager that most of the doctors that are prescribing this shit are the true scums of the world. These are the real drug dealers my teachers and parents tried to warn me about as a kid. They swore to help those in need, and we trust them, literally, with our lives. It's so easy to believe a man who has 12 more years of education than me when he tells me something will be good for me if I don't change my paradigm. These people are just doing a job for money. Anyway, after the 3rd month, I asked to start tapering down. After all, my goal is to get off the drugs, and besides, they're incredibly expensive, and health insurance doesn't give a fuck about my recovery, so they don't cover it. Not to mention, I have to pay the drug dealer for the script. $200 a month plus $25 for drug tests, because if I'm taking anything else, I can't have the Suboxone. Technically, I'm still spending as much as I was on the street. Getting off these drugs is a very slow and lengthy process. I suggest we wait a couple of more months to let the healing continue. The good doctor told me. I had no real issue with that. I trusted him. By month 7, I'm still on the maximum dose the state can legally prescribe me, and I'm asking to be taken down every month. I begin to realize what's going on, and I start reading up. I know now he has no intention of taking me off these drugs, because at month 8 I'm prescribed 3 per day as usual, and after my unrelenting desire to come down, I'm told to only take 2 3/4 every day. For the next 2 months. At this point, I'm done. I realize that this man probably sees 20 people a day, and this is all this clinic does anyway. A husband and wife venture at $200 a pop promises them recovery with no intention of actually setting them free. So I stopped going. I will not be a slave anymore. I try to taper myself off, which seems to go great. What I didn't realize is the half-life of Suboxone is ridiculously long, and it actually accumulates inside of me, sort of like stacking. At a certain point, I'm just saving more for later, in a sense. I start to get sick because I'm not taking enough anymore, and my backlog is running out. I felt great for that first week, only taking half a pill a day, but that shit was accumulated in my system from heavy dosing every day for months. I'm nearly out of my medicine, and since I bailed on the program, I won't be let back in. Time to call on the medicine I know can work. The shroom. I acquire a ½ ounce of some very nice-looking golden teachers, and I'm prepared to take a heroic dose that night after work and sort myself out, once and for all. Except this time, I'm not going to lie to the shroom. I'm going to show it who and what I really am. I want it to meet the real me. I do not clean. I do not meditate. I do not plan. I do nothing but focus my intent on exposing my weakness to the universe and having the shroom teach me how to set myself free. I explain to my wife that I'm going to trip tonight, but I do not tell her my intention. She would soon find out anyway, because shit is about to get heavy. We get the kid to sleep at about 8:30 p.m, and I begin consuming the shrooms. I eat spoonfuls of crushed powder, one after the other, until I've had nearly 4 grams. Not a hero dose, to be sure. I wanted to sniff these out. I'd never purchased from this guy before. The wife and I chat for a while. I browse for anime on Netflix. I don't watch anime in real life, but I love it when I'm flying through hyperspace for some reason. I settle on Kill La Kill. Bad idea, in retrospect. At about 9 p.m, the wife kisses me goodnight and asks if I'll be alright. Of course, I respond, and she's off. I would not be alright. By now I can feel the shroom taking me over. The colours aren't as vibrant as I'd like, but everything has a sort of aura to it. It is like I can see every object's molecular signature as a vibrating coloured ring. Time to eat more of these. Bad idea, you impulsive monkey. I eat several more spoonfuls, I approximate 5 to 6 more grams, and sit back in my chair. The visuals are coming, but they aren't right. I'm definitely getting some visuals, but they're not like any that I've really experienced before. These are very dark feelings, and everything has an aura, living or not. Most of them seem terribly out of place and not angelic in nature at all. It's cool though, I'm just tripping, but fucking hard now. I check the time, 9:15 p.m. Everything is vibrating with great intensity in waves now. It's as if something is holding my very core and vibrating it. Imagine holding one of those vibrating back massagers to your forehead and turning it on for a couple of seconds, repeating every half minute. It was incredibly intense and began to get very loud, almost like a train passing right by me. This takes my breath away and I need a different view, so I go to the backyard, where I have spent many nights laying on the trampoline and pondering the infinite wonders of the universe. It was very cold out that night and I became immediately uncomfortable, which is weird because my backyard has been my tripping sanctuary for years. I realized that I was panicking. I realized I was about to get what I asked for. I wanted the shroom to set me free, but that is not what the shroom is here for. It does not serve me or my wants. It is here to share its knowledge and insight with those willing to listen with their hearts. It's here to tell me what I need to hear. I run back inside because I realize now that this is going to be a rough ride. I can feel it coming on. I have to calm myself before I spiral out of control. I know better than to control it, but I can't help it. This is too heavy. I sit in my chair and I look at my dog, who is standing defensively with that mohawk they get on their backs when they're about to attack, and she is dead-ass staring into the depths of my soul, and she is scared of me. The vibrating thing comes back with outrageous intensity. I lack the words to adequately describe it. It was like God vibrating the entire universe all around me, and not in a happy good vibration type way, more like you just shattered the fabric of your reality vibrating. And for real, shit is about to shatter, so duck and cover. I yell for my wife to come get the dog because I think she's going to attack me, and she runs into the living room and calls for the dog to come with her. To me, it seemed as if the dog was backing away from me, but never turning her back out of fear that I would attack. I was informed the next day by my wife that the dog was asleep when I called for her, and she went right to bed. Now that the dog was put away, I calmed down for a brief period. In this moment of clarity, I was able to check the clock. 9:45 p.m, this shit was just beginning. I grabbed a blanket and lay on the couch. My mind began to deconstruct. It seemed to fragment. Each thought became a tangible physical space in my head, packed in like a moving van, but inside an infinite conch shell. I could see them with my mind's eye, and they began to slide is the best word to describe it, or more like being suspended in the middle of the conch shell as it expanded in a spiral infinitely outward and inward at once. They were sliding over and under each other, getting all mixed up and out of space dimensionally. I was losing my sense of self as my identity, my thoughts and memories began to scatter, as if they were running from something and getting trampled in the stampede. Keep in mind that my eyes are closed all this time. These aren't visual hallucinations. They are in my mind, all closed-eye visuals. As I tried to lay back and let go, these silver geometric fractal-skinned snakes began to coil their way through my disorganized thoughts, or rather my desperate attempt to hold on to what was left of my ego, trying to protect my identity. There were two of them, each identical and moving in a perfect mirror image of themselves, eating away at my being, my essence, me, as they writhed and twisted their way towards what I assume was myself, my mind's eye, I suppose. As they approached me, they stood tall on their tails, rising 50 feet above me, it seemed. Their mouths opened and they began doing something akin to throat singing. At this point, I'm terrified beyond all belief, and I crawl to my wife's bedside, waking her up in a fury, climbing in beside her and proclaiming, "Snakes are eating my brain, Sarah, they're killing me." She immediately takes hold of me and reminds me that this is just the shroom and that I've nothing to fear, repeating the words I told her to tell me if this happens. But it doesn't matter what she's telling me. I'm scared so badly. Now I'm sobbing like an infant in my wife's arms, literally screaming for my mum, scared, broken. Suddenly, the most powerful noise I've ever heard cracks across my entire universe, like lightning striking from 1,000 angles all at once, all around me. I feel my soul suddenly being removed from my body, which I understand instantly to be my vessel, not myself or who I am. It's just a body, a holding cell. I see my soul. It's jade blue coloured and shaped as a teardrop and made of fractals, and it's so beautiful I want to cry. It is then that the snakes come out from behind it, except now they are black and dripping with vile ooze. They begin to constrict around my soul and they squeeze at it, making it hard for my soul to breathe. I ask, "What is happening?" And the loudest, most magnificent booming voice I'll ever hear proclaims, "That is your soul. Look at it. Look what you have done to it." With every single word and syllable, the universe violently quakes, and I, an atheist only 2 seconds ago, understand this to be the voice of some supreme entity, God. They're disgusting! I'm screaming. How do I get rid of them? Please, please take them away. I beg this infinitely staggering power. You invited them in, and you must be the one to make them leave. You have polluted your mind and body with synthetic drugs and have given these demons the perfect breeding ground to thrive and grow. Every pill you take feeds them, and every lie you tell makes them stronger. You must beg for forgiveness if you wish to rid your soul of these demons. I began to confess to my wife every single sin I've made against her, all the drug abuse that I lied about, all the money I pissed away. I told her that I was a disgusting failure of a human and not worthy to occupy her physical plane. I poured my heart out, and I meant it more than I've ever meant anything. This was my penultimate confession of my selfishness. The whole time I'm doing this, the demons slowly separate themselves from my soul and begin to leave my headspace. They stay at the periphery of my mind's eye, alongside the God entity, only light, all-encompassing, no shape, that barred my soul. They watched as I, a staunch atheist, confessed my sins to some deity and my loved ones, and prayed to myself and my soul for the strength to stave off the demons. I felt an angelic presence appear suddenly in the room. I knew that I had purged myself of these demons that represented my addictions and damaging lifestyle choices. It wasn't an entity, though. It was more like serenity made into a tangible thing I could sense and smell. It felt amazing. I stopped crying and I softly said, "I'm so sorry," to myself over and over as my wife tried to comfort me. And I had meant it. I was so very sorrowful and ashamed for what I had put myself through, after seeing what my life, our lives represent as a beautiful energy we can grow. As I did this, the demons and gods left my headspace, and I was alone at last. The time now was 10:30 p.m. For the next 5 hours, I would lay in bed, crying on and off, while my mind resumed sliding around, and I was unable to grasp any tangible thoughts. All notions of reality were a joke to me. I couldn't even talk. This didn't bother me, though. I had been broken. It was actually sort of serene watching my thoughts, my memories, my being, floating around the hyperspace in my head. I didn't fight anything. I just accepted the ride and lay with my eyes closed until 3 a.m, when the shroom would finally say its farewells and grant me my human peace. As I fell asleep, I remember thinking how excited I was to meet the new me the next morning. That was about 8 months ago now, and while the withdrawals just about made me want to die, I went cold turkey, and I haven't had any drugs besides marijuana since that night. That's not true, actually. I got really drunk those first few nights of withdrawal. It was the only way I could sleep. Although they are not physical, I know that those snakes were real. They are not metaphorical. They live in my soul and feed off negativity. The silver snakes live there too, but they feed off of love. I've been feeding the wrong ones for 22 years now, and they did not want to die. They had grown big and strong whilst I forced the others to live off only my happy memories, or the past, if you will, leaving me with nothing more than negativity. I wasn't producing any happy memories to feed the right ones. I'm not one to practice any religion or anything, but I firmly believe in a higher power that lives within every living thing in our universe. It's pure energy, and it is all things, and encompasses all good and evil. The beauty in our physical being is that we are blessed with free will, and we are allowed to choose for ourselves whether we live with good or evil in our hearts. It's our choice which serpent we feed, light and dark, heaven and hell, love and hate, all the same thing. These things, I believe, are the driving force in our universe, and they are tools for us to use and learn from. They exist not just as emotions, but as actual entities that live beyond our physical realm and encompass all things. They are two ends of the opposite spectrum, twins sort of, and all sentient life exists in between. They are life itself. Every emotion in the spectrum exists between love and hate, and without those two polar opposites, I could not be happy, sad, jealous, angry, or any of the numerous emotions our species is blessed with. I know that was really long, and I don't care if you read it or not. I'm considering this my confessional. I feel that it is important to expose myself so that my promised recovery will be easier by way of fear of letting anyone down, even if you are all a bunch of strangers. You're all so shroomers, so I know you love me, and I love you. It's also ego, though. I've always been ashamed of what I had become and hidden it from the world. No more. I'm finished hiding behind a wall of false security and promised eventualities. It's done nothing but slowly eat my beautiful soul, which can't grow while being buried with indiscretions. Thank you, if you did read it. I mean that. I hope this helps someone. If even one of you takes something away from this, I will feel that much more redeemed. All my love and peace to your soul. Speaking as someone who suffers from depression, I have found that the occasional use of psychedelic substances has been incredibly useful, not only for gaining insight into my issues, but also as a tool for gaining clarity of thought for several months after each experience. I have used LSD and mushrooms several times over the last few years, and I will continue to do so for as long as I need them. I do not use psychedelic substances purely for recreation. Although the experience is enjoyable, the primary purpose for me is that of a self-medicating nature. With this in mind, I hereby submit my report in the hope that others in a similar situation may find it useful. I have never used truffles before. I have always stuck to LSD obtained from a reliable source and mushrooms, which I grow myself. I decided to try truffles on the recommendation of a friend who swore blind that they were superior to mushrooms. I found it hard to agree with this, as the active ingredients are essentially the same. However, the opportunity to acquire some truffles recently presented itself, so I decided to give them a try. I never use psychedelic substances to simply get high. To me, this is a waste. My depression is such that every so often my mood reaches a point where the usual coping techniques simply do not work. Things such as active distraction, antidepressants, exercise, change in diet, cultivating a new hobby, and so on. I have learned over the years that LSD and mushrooms have an uncanny ability to reset one's mindset. I like to think of it as the etch-a-sketch solution. The mind becomes jumbled and confused, and LSD or psilocybin seem to shake it all away. My mindset upon beginning the truffle experience was, to put it bluntly, dire. I felt lethargic, irritable, unmotivated, and thoroughly unhappy. I wasn't sleeping well, and I had put on a little weight due to comfort eating. It was time to begin the cleansing process. I finished work on Friday afternoon at around 5 p.m. I drove home and immediately began to tidy my living room. Previous experience has taught me that having a psychedelic experience when all around me is untidy does not make for a good time. I dusted, put away all loose clothes, and took out my lava lamp. I draped patterned throws over my sofa and table and proceeded to put on some music. In short, I did everything possible to make my environment as comfortable as possible. I turned off my phone and locked my front door. I was now inside my cocoon and felt safe. The truffles had arrived a few days earlier, and I had been keeping them in my fridge. They were vacuum sealed in small bags. I decided to make tea with them. I boiled the kettle and filled a normal-sized coffee cup with water. I then emptied the contents of one of the truffle bags onto a plate. I used a knife to carefully cut the truffles into very small pieces, approximately the same size as instant coffee granules. By the time I'd done this, the water was no longer at boiling temperature, so I put the truffles into the mug. I took the mug into the living room and listened to some music for about 30 minutes. At 7:15 p.m, the water was still warm, but cool enough to drink. I gave the contents a little stir, then drank it all, including the bits of mushrooms. A little swirling was needed towards the end to get all the bits from the side of the mug. The taste was fairly unremarkable, ever so slightly nutty, not at all unpleasant. I then laid back and decided to play some Tetris on my Game Boy to try and forget that I had just taken the truffles. I find that waiting for something to happen can be a real source of anxiety. It was around 8 p.m. now, and for about 3/4 of an hour, nothing seemed to happen. I began to question whether I had made the drink correctly. I assumed that preparing truffles the same way I would prepare mushrooms would be sufficient. I began to get annoyed at myself for not researching truffle prep methods. At this point, I felt the first effects. I stood up and was immediately aware of the weight of my body. It felt very heavy. My legs were a little wobbly and the carpet felt very spongy. These sensations were not a surprise at all. It felt almost exactly like a mushroom high. The next emotion I experienced was relief. Relief at the thought that I had in fact prepared the truffles correctly. I decided to take this opportunity to have a last cigarette. I had no idea how strong the effect would be, or how much of my bodily functions I would retain, so instead of running the risk of dropping a cigarette, I thought it'd be wise to have one now. I did not get that far, however. I held a cigarette to my lips and struck my lighter. The flame began to flicker as though it was in a breeze, and it had a sort of halo aura around it. I looked up and saw that my lamps also had similar effects around them. I found this most interesting and completely forgot about having a cigarette. Indeed, I remember putting down my lighter but kept holding the unlit cigarette. I noticed the time; it was 8:20. The light effects were still present, but now I could also see that the walls were expanding and contracting slightly. This did not interest me at all. I had seen this effect many times before while under the influence of LSD, and I paid no attention to it. What I did pay a lot of attention to, however, was the spectrum light effect that seemed to emanate from the corner of my peripheral vision. I found this to be most entertaining, and it was not something that I had previously experienced with mushrooms or LSD. It was as though there was a rainbow in each corner of the room, but when I turned to look at them, they disappeared. I tried to look as far to my left as I could without turning my head. This conjured up in my mind the image of an owl turning his head around. For some reason, this was instantly hysterical to me, and I succumbed to a raging fit of the giggles. I'm not sure how long this went on, but when I stopped laughing, my throat was sore and I had tears down my face. I would describe this part of the experience as having a distinctly disassociating quality. It was not unpleasant, but I did feel a little annoyed afterwards because I felt as though I had spent too long a period laughing at what I thought was a beginner hallucination. From this point on, I do not recall what time the events took place. I only remember the order in which they happened. My throat felt very sore and dry. I can only assume this was from all the laughing, so I decided to get up and find something to drink. Up until this point, I had remained on my sofa. As I stood up, I noticed that my body felt very heavy. My legs were like jelly, and the floor felt very soft and squishy. If anyone were to have seen me at this point, I highly doubt that I would have been able to hide the fact that I was under the influence of something. I stumbled to the kitchen and took a bottle of Coke from the fridge. The light inside the fridge was blinding. Spectacular rainbow effects radiated from the bulb in a sort of spherical gradient effect. Upon opening the bottle, the normal fizzing sound was magnified tenfold. It was like no other sound I had ever heard. A metallic sound whooshing, almost like a dog bark, but played backwards through some kind of effects filter. I enjoyed this sound very much. So much so that I stood by the open fridge for a while, closing and reopening the bottle over and over. In fact, I do not remember even having anything to drink. The next thing I remember is being back on the sofa. I do not remember walking back to it. I mentioned this earlier, but the truffles had a very definite dissociative effect. By this point, I was feeling very tired, and I decided that it was probably time for bed. I always have a cigarette before bed, and even though I was very much intoxicated, I made a conscious decision to have one. I sat on the floor in front of my coffee table. I rested my chin on the table and placed an ashtray near my face. I had a very definite concern in my mind of possibly accidentally burning myself, or worse yet, burning my living room down to the ground. I put the cigarette to what I presumed were my lips and reached for my lighter. Again, the rainbow effect was present around the bright light that the flame created. I successfully lit the cigarette and managed to smoke the whole thing. The sounds that the burning tobacco made were exquisite. A very loud, crackling sound. It sounded exactly like leaves and sticks being broken underfoot. I had a very vivid image of someone walking through the woods. I closed my eyes to try and enjoy it more. At this point, I realized that I had thus far neglected to pay any attention to any closed-eye visuals that may be occurring. Excited at this prospect, I made a beeline for my bed. The clock in my bedroom said 20 past midnight. Time had apparently gotten away from me, although it felt as though I had really not done much at all. I put my headphones on and listened to some music, specifically a group called Tangerine Dream. As I closed my eyes, I began to see the familiar grayscale swirling patterns. This was not new to me and I found it rather boring. Although something I did enjoy was the way my body felt. I did not feel paralyzed, but rather I had absolutely no motivation to move whatsoever. I felt trapped, but not in a frightening way. I was lying on my side, but I felt as though I was completely flat. Soon after this, I realized that I had been slowly and quietly muttering to myself. This came as a shock and was a little unsettling. I could not work out if I was either hearing voices or talking to myself. I could not make out what was being said. I put my hands to my lips to feel if my lips were moving. They were. This was by far the most rewarding part of the whole experience. I felt as though I had crossed over into some sort of alternative way of thinking, allowing my subconscious self to think freely without the handicap of my inner monologue. I felt utterly divided. I felt like two different people in one body. I had removed my headphones, but I do not remember doing this. Sadly, the next memory I have is that of waking up. My alarm was set for 10 in the morning, and it woke me like it always does. I had an incredibly dry mouth, and the first thing I did was have an enormous glass of water. My body worked normally again, and the only after effect I had was a sore neck. I have no idea how this occurred. The first thing I will say is that the truffle experience helped me achieve that which I have achieved from LSD and mushrooms, and my depressive symptoms had gone. No more confusion, irritability, anxiety, or feelings of sadness. I felt refreshed and alert. I still do today. I took truffles approximately 5 weeks ago. For me, psychedelic experiences are an essential and invaluable tool for maintaining a clear mindset. The difference between mushrooms and truffles, in my opinion, was minimal. Some differences occurred as outlined previously, but I can only put this down to differences in strength and strain. The mushrooms I grow are Psilocybe mexicana, and the truffles were the Atlantis strain. I'm no expert on strains, however, so I have no real input on this. I will most definitely be using truffles again. The experience was very similar to mushrooms, but had some extra qualities that I would very much like to experience again. I have a diagnosis of clinical depression, and this has been the case for well over 10 years. I have attended psychotherapy and taken various SSRI medications over the years. I have not had any prescribed medication for the last 2 years or so. Medication for me, at best, was a way of treating my symptoms and not the condition. I have reached a point in my life now where I can say with sincerity that I have a handle on my condition and have no further need for medication. I find psychedelic substances to be extremely useful in resetting my mind when my mood reaches a point of no return on the depressive scale, as it were. However, I do not for one moment encourage anyone listening to this to self-medicate with psychedelics, instead of taking antidepressants prescribed by a doctor. I mention it in my report only for the sake of accuracy and authenticity. Thanks for listening.